I love Canada, the words of Donald Trump at the White House in the company of the newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney, making his first trip to the White House as leader of the United States, his neighbor to the north. The same Donald Trump, who earlier in the day on his social medium had said, quote, "We don't need their cars, we don't need their energy, we don't need their lumber, we don't need anything," and who then was, as Douglas Herbert, who is sitting here in the studio with us.
That's Truth Social.
That is Truth Social.
He posted that about an hour before going into this meeting. Carney.
But as you predicted, it was much more cordial.
Conciliatory, I'd even use the word, François. Listen, there's always the Donald Trump, the rhetoric, and then the reality of what happens when he's actually face-to-face with his interlocutor. In this case, as that post, which we just took down, the True Social post was basically a post citing this extremely, gigantically inflated trade deficit figure between the U.S. and Canada, right? Really, really a blow to the jugular of Canada. And then, not suggesting, but saying in that same post, essentially, that the United States is subsidizing its giant neighbor to the north. Then you come into this meeting where the two men are sitting face to face, and Carney is stone-faced, and he really keeps his composure, and he's sitting there listening to all of this. And Donald Trump, there was a much more almost, you said cordial, I say conciliatory, because the tone was even odd, even on the absurdly bombastic issue of making Canada a 51st state. You know, this has become almost not just a meme, but it's become this sort of surrealist, absurdist theme that they keep bringing up. On this theme, Carney gave as good as he got because, you know, Donald Trump was speaking in real estate terms, and he went on and on, repeatedly, droning on about the 51st state thing and what a beautiful thing it would be if these two countries erased that, what he called an artificial line, that boundary. It's called a border between two sovereign nations. But just take it away. It would be such a beautiful thing. And Carney appealing. Once again, this is where the savviness of this encounter, I think, came in. Carney, while speaking firmly and doing what he said on the campaign trail he would do, which is stand up to Trump, while standing up to Trump, he also, in a way, was conciliating him and reaching out to him and flattering a part of Trump's ego, saying, as you know from real estate. So he's making that connection with Donald Trump. Here's the savviness, and saying in the next breath, and as you know from real estate, some things are never for sale. And then comes the Carney pivot. What's the pivot? In the next breath, he says, the opportunity is in the partnership. Bang. That's the message that he came from Ottawa to bring. The message is, when he starts talking 51st state, you say, yes, I understand real estate terms. It's not for sale. Pivot. Pivot to what you came for. Making a deal. These are two people who can sit, and Donald Trump indicated that he's seen him debate. He respects this man. He knows he's clever. He can do business with him, and that's what Carney is essentially messaging to Donald Trump. You're not going to be our master. We're not going to be your 51st state. We're not going to be joint at the hip that way. But we can be very strong as partners, and that's what I'm here to do. If you want to talk to me about that, then I am all ears. Let's talk.
All right, well, let's go to the Canadian capital. Genevieve Tellier is a professor there at the School of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Certainly, Mark Carney will score points with citizens back home when Donald Trump talked about 51st state and he mouthed the word never before the White House press pool. But there were also, at times, if we're going into this cold and we don't know much about the topic, things that sounded a little bit like it was Trump's language. For instance, he talks about securing the Arctic. This is Mark Carney. He talks about securing the Arctic and developing the Arctic. What did the Canadian Prime Minister mean?
This is something he talked during the electoral campaign, and so the plan of Mark Carney is to invest massively in the economy, and one way of doing that is to build new infrastructure. Now, where do you build those infrastructure? With climate changes, that has a big impact on the north of Canada, and so those northern area where it was difficult to go to now are much more accessible, and there are a new threat coming from Russia, coming from China, and so we have to protect the northern part of the country, and so that would be a win-win in the sense that you build infrastructure. Oh, by the way, it's defense infrastructure. So it helps us to increase our spending in defense, which we badly need if we want to attain our NATO targets. And it pleases also Donald Trump. And so that is a key factor, that is a key piece in the Carney plan about how to develop Canada, how to build new investment in the country. And I'm sure this will be used as a piece of negotiation with Donald Trump.
Mark Carney, who also said that there are there's a quote, some things about the free trade agreement that currently stands, the USMCA, that will have to change.
Yes, I'm not sure exactly what he's making reference to because pretty much it's a free trade agreement. So basically, most of the goods, there are a few exceptions, but most of the goods could cross the border without any tariffs. I think that what Canadians will want to do is to put in some security measure to avoid new tariff to be imposed on Canadian goods. And so what Donald Trump is doing actually hurts the Canadian economy. And so if we would have new provision of sanctions, for instance, I'm not sure exactly what kind of sanction, but that's going to be probably presented eventually by the Prime Minister. But having those provisions to secure a bit more, to protect a bit more the Canadian market in face of threats as we have currently, and maybe also targeting some specific sector like the automobile sector, which is so important for Canada. And now we're seeing some jobs that are lost. Maybe a few plants that are partially closing, maybe reallocating in the U.S. And so that could be the kind of measure we want to put in place to strengthen the Canadian economy.
Mark Carney is a known figure for years, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England. Yet this is his first time that he's been elected to public office. Were there questions over whether he might be a bit ambushed when he was inside the White House? He held his own in the end.
Yes, and if you could look at his body language, at the end when Donald Trump was still talking about the 51st state, it was not really something that pleased Mark Carney. And he said also during the electoral campaign that Canada commands respect, and so he expects the president not to make reference to the 51st state. It was discussed this morning, but it came from a question from a journalist. I'm not sure Donald Trump really wanted to bring that topic with him. That being said, yes, Mark Carney, I think all Canadians were kind of hesitant, were unsure, hoped that it would go well. And I would say so far, so good, so far, so good. Still, there are a few hours remaining in the meetings, and so we'll know a bit more at the end of the day if it still holds. But I think that what we have seen here in Canada, first impression seems to be going well. Now, everybody in Canada remembers that was the same thing with Justin Trudeau at the time. So 10 years ago, the initial relationship with Donald Trump was good. At a point, it deteriorated. So we hope that it won't happen this time. And yes, as you said, Mark Carney is very skillful. So maybe the first time as an elected official, but he is knowledgeable about those negotiations. So probably he has a lot of knowledge that would be helpful for him and also for the country.
One final question for you, Genevieve. At one point, Donald Trump making the pitch for Canada to become the 51st state, he said you have free military, tremendous health care, and massive tax cuts. How will that land where you are?
Well, the healthcare won't pass, that's for sure. So I think Canadians are laughing when they are hearing that. Tax cuts, we did have a few tax cuts in the past, and that has a big impact on the quality of our social programs. So there may be some appetite for some Canadians, but probably not for every Canadian. And no, surveys after surveys shows that Canada don't want to be Americans and wants to remain Canadians. So again, we're starting to be used about that, but for sure the healthcare system is not the one that we envy, the American one.
Genevieve Tellier, many thanks for being with us from Ottawa. Douglas Herbert, one last question. At the beginning of that press conference, Donald Trump talking about Yemen after 2 days where we've seen Israeli strikes in succession. This Tuesday, they hit Sana'a airport and electric infrastructure, this in retaliation to Houthi missiles launched on Israel, saying that the Houthis had agreed to stop the missiles and talking up teasing some big announcement that's going to come either Friday or next Monday, but he didn't say.
I don't think those two things are related. But regarding the Houthis, maybe I misread it here. It looked like almost as if Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, was taken a little off guard by this announcement, as if he was hearing for the first time that we're stopping the bombing of the Houthis. He said, "Marco, you're going to get that news out. You'll tell people." And there's often that effect with Trump. He'll say something, and even his closest advisors are sort of not quite in the know, or if they are, it's the first time they're hearing him say it in a particular way. But look, it comes in a context of comes in the context of relentless bombing campaign for the past weeks and months by the United States, especially which intensified under the Trump administration against the Houthis, who have been preventing shipping in the region, basically targeting Western ships at great economic cost and everything. And within that context, the relentless bombing has been trying to send the message to the Houthis: we're going to keep going until you stop. It would surprise me, François, and I'm not saying you can rule it out, but it would surprise me if the Houthis all of a sudden put out a press release saying Donald Trump was absolutely right. We're stopping the bombing at 0800, GMT, whatever. My hunch is that he was saying something almost as a negotiating tactic, almost to ramp up the pressure on the Houthis. If you say it, if you will it enough, it will happen. He's sending a very forceful message to the Houthis. This is going to get worse before it gets better, unless you stop your bombing in the region. I will be very interested to hear what the Houthis respond, but I don't see the Houthis all of a sudden ending a campaign that they have kept up really since, in what they say is in the name of defending the Palestinian cause, since the outbreak of this horrific war in the region back on October 7, 2023. So you have an announcement and the rhetoric on the one hand out of the White House in this high-profile Oval Office meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister, seemingly coming out of nowhere, a dramatic announcement, and then you have the reality of what the Houthis are actually going to say. And like I said, I don't think it's quite the way Donald Trump announced it today. At least I'd be pleasantly surprised, perhaps, that the Houthis said, yep, he got it right, no more bombing, and we're stopping everything. We've agreed to that.
All right, the missiles which have disrupted shipping in the Red Sea. In the last hour, a spokesperson for the airport in in Yemen's capital, Sana'a, saying that it's been completely destroyed. That's a quote, because of those Israeli airstrikes that have hit for a second day on Yemen's capital. Many thanks, Douglas Herbert, for that. Reminder.